along for the ride.
Hi, I'm Anna Covert, and this is The Solar Coaster, the wild ride through the solar industry told by the people living it every day. I'm joined by my colleague, Alex Herrera. How are you, Alex?
I'm doing well, Anna. Today we are getting into something that I think is genuinely one of the most important shifts we've seen in U.S. power markets in years. Not months, years.
Yeah, we're talking about a new report from Enverus Intelligence Research that basically says the U.S. grid has flipped its priorities. It is no longer optimizing for the cheapest electricity. It's optimizing for reliable electricity. And that changes everything for solar developers.
It really does. The headline number is this: U.S. electricity demand is projected to surge 34% by 2050. That's not a rounding error. That's a structural transformation of the entire market, driven by data centers, electrification, and industrial load growth that is outpacing new capacity additions.
And the grid is feeling that pressure right now, not in 2050. We're already in the squeeze. So let's get into it. What does this actually mean for solar? Because I think the answer is more nuanced than either the doomers or the cheerleaders are making it out to be.
Agreed. Let's start with the big picture shift and work our way into the specifics. Interconnection, storage, behind the meter, policy headwinds, all of it.
So let me frame this for our listeners. For the last decade, the story in renewables was solar and wind are winning because they're the cheapest electrons on the grid. Levelized cost of energy keeps falling, renewables keep eating market share. That was the whole narrative.
Right, and that narrative was true. It drove massive deployment, but here's what it missed. Cheapness isn't the same as reliability. And when you're dealing with a grid where demand is spiking, concentrated, intense, and sometimes unpredictable, cheapness alone doesn't cut it anymore.
The example in the Enverus report that really jumped out at me was Winter Storm Fern in January. New York and Massachusetts, states that have been really aggressive on solar build-out, turned to oil to keep the lights on during the peak cold snap. Oil in 2026.
That number was staggering. Oil and dual fuel generation hit 44% of total generation in NYISO during the peak. 44%. And about 35% in ISO New England. Because they couldn't get more gas, the gas infrastructure was already maxed out, and solar wasn't generating enough in the winter conditions.
Now, to be fair, I want to push back a little on the solar failed framing. Solar in New York in January. Short days, low sun angles, cloud cover and snow. It's not that solar failed. It's that solar was never going to be the primary dispatchable resource in that scenario. That's just physics.
That's a fair distinction, but here's the thing, and this is what I think the EIR report is really saying. It doesn't matter if solar falling short in a winter storm is quote-unquote unfair. The grid operators don't care about fair. They care about keeping the lights on. The quote from Juan Arteaga at EIR was pretty blunt. They don't care as much where the electricity is coming from. That's the reality.
And that's a really important mindset shift for developers to internalize. Grid operators are now asking a different question. It's not what's the cheapest option, it's what can I depend on at 5 p.m. on a January evening when it's negative 10 degrees. If you can't answer that question with your project, you're going to have a harder time getting prioritized.
Which brings us to interconnection. Because the queue issue is already bad, and it's getting worse.
The report says interconnection delays are now averaging 3.5 years. That is not a minor administrative inconvenience. That is a project-killing timeline if you're trying to respond to market signals that are shifting right now.
And the ISOs are making it worse for renewables in the short term, not intentionally, but structurally. Because the same demand pressure that's creating opportunity for new generation is also making grid operators prioritize what they see as reliable, dispatchable capacity. And in practice, that means gas projects are getting fast-tracked.
Arteaga said ISOs are, in some cases, just skipping the queue for gas projects they deem necessary to get online before 2030. That is a significant policy signal.
It is, and I understand the pragmatic argument. If you need reliable capacity by 2027 or 2028, you go with what you can deploy fast. But here's the irony I find almost poetic about this situation.
Hit me.
You cannot even place an order for a new gas turbine that will be delivered before 2030. The manufacturers are completely backlogged. So ISOs are fast tracking gas projects that can't actually get their core equipment. The supply chain constraint is as bad for gas as the interconnection queue is for solar.
That is kind of poetic, isn't it? Everyone is scrambling to get capacity, and the equipment that everyone wants is completely tied up.
Which it is! That's exactly what's happening. You've got data center operators, industrial electrification, EV charging infrastructure, residential electrification. Everyone is pulling from the same grid at the same time. And the physical infrastructure of both generation and transmission just hasn't kept pace.
So, what do you do if you're a solar developer looking at a 3.5 year interconnection queue? Because you can't just sit on your hands.
This is where it gets interesting, and honestly, where I get a little more optimistic because the constraints are real, but so are the workarounds.
Let's start with battery storage, because that's the most obvious pairing with solar.
Right. The fundamental problem with solar in a reliability first world is intermittency. You can't dispatch solar at will. But solar plus storage changes the conversation entirely. If you can store energy generated during the day and dispatch it in the evening peak or during a weather event, you're suddenly answering that grid operator question, can I depend on you?
The Enverus report notes that battery storage still retains federal tax credit support. That's important because a lot of other incentives are getting squeezed. But the caveat is real. They flag that market saturation, lower price volatility, and compliance uncertainty are narrowing opportunities for storage. So you can't just throw batteries at every project and assume it pencils out.
Regional selectivity is key. The Texas example in the report is instructive. ERCOT actually handled Winter Storm Fern better than the Northeast, and a big part of that was the storage capacity on the grid. But ERCOT is also so saturated with batteries that ancillary services revenues have dropped nearly 90% from their peak.
90% is wild. That's a dramatic compression of the revenue stack for storage in Texas specifically.
So the lesson is, solar plus storage is the right strategy, but where you deploy it and how you structure the revenue model matters enormously. A project that would be a home run in the Southeast or the Mountain West might be underwater in ERCOT right now.
Okay, let's talk about behind the meter generation, because I think this is genuinely underappreciated right now.
Walk us through it.
If the interconnection queue is your bottleneck, you route around it. Instead of building a utility scale solar farm that needs to interconnect to the grid, you build generation that serves load directly on the customer side of the meter. Essentially, gigawatt scale microgrids serving hyperscale data centers or large industrial users directly.
And the demand is there. These data center operators are desperate for power. We're talking about companies that will sign 15 or 20-year offtake agreements for reliable, clean power. They want to get off the utility queue because they're facing the same interconnection delays everyone else is.
There was a PV Magazine piece from late January about this, how behind the meter generation is actually scaling up to gigawatt scale. That was kind of unimaginable 5 years ago. Behind the meter used to mean rooftop solar and a home battery. Now it means a 500 megawatt solar farm with co-located storage serving a single data campus.
The economics are different, the regulatory landscape is different, but the fundamental value proposition is compelling. You control your own energy supply, you're not beholden to the interconnection queue, and your customer is willing to pay a premium for certainty.
And the third piece of the opportunity puzzle, domestic manufacturing. The FEOC requirements, the foreign entity of concern restrictions, are pushing supply chains toward domestic investment. Companies are expanding U.S. module manufacturing. It's not painless, costs are higher, but if the tariff wall stays up, there's a real business case for domestic modules and balance of system components.
And that raises LCOE, which on paper looks bad for solar competitiveness. But here's my counterpoint. If the grid is no longer purely optimizing for lowest marginal cost, then a slightly higher LCOE for reliable, dispatchable, domestically sourced solar plus storage is not the competitive disadvantage it used to be.
That's a really important reframe. The game has changed. The rules have changed. And if you're still playing the old game, competing purely on LCOE, you might be winning the wrong battle.
Let's spend a minute on the policy environment because I don't want to gloss over it.
No, we need to be honest. The report flags that solar transaction valuations fell sharply in 2025. Deal multiples dropped to roughly half of the roughly $1 million per megawatt levels we'd seen since late 2024. That's not a blip. That's the market repricing risk.
And the risk factors are real. Accelerated tax credit retirements, new tariffs, FEOC requirements. All of these are pushing LCOE higher for solar. The IRA was transformative, but the current policy direction is creating uncertainty about how long those incentives persist.
There's a painful irony here. The demand surge creating the need for new generation capacity, data centers, electrification, that's partly being driven by the very tech and AI build-out that everyone in the energy space is excited about. But the policy environment that should be capitalizing on that demand to accelerate solar deployment is instead introducing new friction.
The honest assessment is the demand fundamentals are as strong as they've ever been for new generation of all types. But solar specifically is navigating a more complex policy environment, a reliability-first procurement mindset, and a cost structure that is temporarily higher due to trade policy.
Temporarily is doing a lot of work in that sentence.
Fair. It may be temporary. Manufacturers adapting to domestic production. The FEOC landscape clarifying over time. Tariffs potentially evolving. There are scenarios where the cost picture improves, but developers need to underwrite projects in the current environment, not the optimistic future one.
Which means the projects that actually get built in the next 2 to 3 years are going to be the ones with strong offtake agreements paired with storage in regions where the resource is great and the market structure rewards dispatchability. That's a more selective filter than it was 2 years ago.
Okay, big picture question. With everything we've discussed, the reliability pivot, the interconnection bottleneck, the LCOE pressures, the policy uncertainty, is solar still winning long term?
Yes, and I don't say that as a cheerleader. I say that because the load growth forecast is essentially a guarantee of demand for new generation capacity for the next 25 years. You cannot build enough of anything fast enough to meet that demand without solar being a major part of the mix.
The gas turbine supply chain constraint is actually a compelling data point here. If you literally cannot order a new gas turbine for delivery before 2030 and demand is growing right now, what fills that gap? It's not going to be nuclear on a short timeline. It's not going to be new hydro. It's going to be solar, wind, and storage.
The interconnection queue issue is real, but also solvable. It's a regulatory and administrative problem more than a physical one. FERC and the ISOs are under immense pressure to reform. Progress has been agonizingly slow, but the pressure keeps building. Behind the meter is a valid, near-term workaround. Storage is improving. Domestic manufacturing is scaling.
The industry has to adapt its pitch, though. The old pitch was, we're cheap. The new pitch needs to be, we're reliable. And we're the only new generation capacity that can actually scale fast enough to meet your demand growth. That's honestly a stronger pitch.
And the demand story strengthens it in a way the purely economic argument never fully did. When grid operators are fast-tracking projects because they're scared about reliability, solar plus storage that can credibly offer dispatchable capacity has a procurement advantage it didn't have 2 years ago.
The question is execution. Can developers restructure their project economics around higher LCOE and reliability-first markets? Can the supply chain catch up? Can interconnection reform actually happen?
Those are the right questions. Nobody has definitive answers yet. But the underlying demand is real, the need is real, and solar is still one of the fastest and most scalable solutions available. The Enverus report itself puts it well. The case for solar remains strong if the industry adapts.
That if is on all of us. All right, what are the actual takeaways? What would we tell a developer or investor listening to this right now?
First, pair everything with storage. Utility scale solar without storage is becoming a harder sell in a reliability first market. The projects that pencil out going forward are solar plus BESS, where you can credibly offer dispatchable capacity.
Second, be regionally selective. The Enverus report is clear that impacts vary significantly by region. A project in the Southeast with great solar resource and a data center PPA looks very different than a project in the Northeast competing in a winter peaking market.
Third, take behind the meter seriously. The hyperscaler demand for co-located generation is real, it's growing, and it sidesteps the interconnection queue. If you have the capabilities and the relationships, that market is wide open right now.
And fourth, don't panic about LCOE. Yes, costs are up, but if the market is no longer purely optimizing for cheapest electrons, a higher LCOE project that offers reliability and certainty can still win. Price your reliability premium into the offtake. The demand is there.
The summary version. The case for solar is still strong, but you have to play the new game, not the old one. That's a wrap on this episode of The Solar Coaster. On behalf of Alex Herrera, I'm Anna Covert. Thanks for listening, and as always, keep building.
Keep building.
Solar coaster, come along for the ride.
This episode of The Solar Coaster is narrated using AI-generated technology, representing Anna Covert and Alex Herrera. The material presented is aggregated from publicly available solar industry news sources. All commentary reflects reported industry developments and does not constitute personal opinions, investment advice, or endorsements by the hosts or
Solar
producers.
Coaster is proudly sponsored by Sun Energy Today, redefining what solar means for business and infrastructure. We engineer and deliver large-scale clean energy solutions, from megawatt solar farms to advanced graphene storage, designed for resilience, performance, and measurable return. Sun Energy Today, built to power what's next. Learn more at sunenergytoday.com.